For 7 years Nyla Voss had lived without a voice. Not a whisper, not a sigh that shaped into words. Silence was her shield, her weapon, her prison. Deep inside Greyfen Forest, she hid in a cabin swallowed by moss and shadow, cloaked under words drawn in blood, salt, and copper. Every symbol etched into the beams, every bell strung above the door, every circle of iron buried beneath the soil had one purpose: to smother her existence, to erase her from the world that hunted her. Because if she spoke, the prophecy would wake. Nyla's silence was not the silence of peace. It was heavy, sharp, and deliberate. Each day she rose before the sun, checked the perimeter stones, and redrew the fading sigils with ash and ink. She lived by ritual: measure, mend, repeat. She hunted small game, gathered roots, and kept herself lean and fast. Her body carried the strength of survival, but her face carried the exhaustion of restraint. A scar across her brow, a permanent crease between her eyes, marks of a woman who had burned every word before it could escape her throat. The ward was her cage, but it was also her mask. Beyond its reach, the pack believed she was dead. Beyond its reach, the alpha who once commanded her life had long buried her name. At least that's what she told herself. But the forest was shifting. One morning she found a wolf's track pressed deep into the wet earth. Not ordinary. Too heavy, too deliberate. The claws had cut straight through soil to stone. Worse, the ground around it was drained pale, as if something had drunk the color from the earth. Nyla crouched, pressing her fingers to the print, and felt the ward's strain against an unseen weight. She didn't flinch. Fear was noise. She simply whispered in her mind the rule she had lived by for 7 years. Do not speak. Do not answer. Do not look back. Still, the air around her quivered as though her silence itself had been heard. Miles away in Blackridge, Alpha Cael Arden woke before dawn. He was a man carved out of discipline, broad-shouldered, storm-eyed, and haunted by the mantle he had been forced to bear too young. The pack saw him as iron, unbreakable. They did not see the nights he lay awake, staring at the rafters, hearing nothing but the echo of a silence that wasn't his. 4 days now, Cael had been dreaming of a place he'd never entered. A cabin lined with sigils, a pendulum clicking inside a copper metronome, and a woman sitting in silence. She never spoke. She only looked at him with eyes that accused, as if he were the reason for her exile. He told himself it was nothing, stress perhaps, or memory. But the dream returned each night, sharper, closer. In council he thought he heard her heartbeat beneath the scrape of chairs. On patrol he swore he smelled iron and ash, faint but real. His grip on the present was slipping, bleeding into a past he had locked away. By dusk, Nyla sat cross-legged on her cabin floor, the metronome steady before her. The beat was her anchor, the pulse of the ward. But tonight it faltered, half a breath behind. She pressed her palm to it, forcing her pulse into the rhythm. Her throat burned as though words were clawing to be free, but she clenched her jaw and held them back. Her silence was the last thing keeping the prophecy asleep. Outside, the forest exhaled. A shape leaned against her door, more shadow than flesh, leaving no sound, no scent. The bells above the frame should have rung, but instead they trembled without noise, vibrating as though caught in an invisible current. A pressure pressed inward, heavy, suffocating. On the other side of the door something traced letters into the wood. 3 words. Backwards. Carved deep. Break. Silence. Nyla's hand trembled above the metronome, but she did not rise. She did not answer. She only held the beat steady. 37 ticks later the pressure withdrew. The shadow melted back into the forest. Only then did she breathe again, slow, steady, without sound. But across the miles in his quarters, Cael Arden jolted awake. His throat was dry, his hands clenched into fists. For the first time in 7 years he whispered a name he should not have remembered. Nyla. The word carried like a strike of flint across stone. And in her cabin Nyla's eyes flew open. At the base of her skull heat bloomed, an invisible thread tugging against the silence she had kept for so long. The Alpha had spoken her name and the prophecy had stirred. The first night after her name was spoken, Nyla could not rest. Sleep came in violent fragments, each one heavier than the last. Her cabin, usually a place sealed tight by wards, felt invaded. She sat awake long after midnight, eyes fixed on the metronome, hand pressed to its copper lid, willing it to hold steady. But each time her eyes closed, the rhythm shifted. Not faltering, sinking. Sinking to a pulse that was not her own. In Blackridge, Cael Arden had no such struggle. Sleep came quickly, almost too easily. And with it, the dreams. He stood in her cabin again, the smell of smoke and salt biting his lungs. She was there, bent over her ledger, hand moving in small sharp lines across the page. She wasn't speaking, but he could hear her thoughts as clear as commands. Rule 1. Do not speak. Rule 2. Never answer. Rule 3. Never look back. He frowned in the dream, unsettled. Her thoughts pressed against him like whispers under the skin, private yet impossible to ignore. The more he listened, the louder they became. Fragments of fear, fragments of resolve. The ward is thinning. They are close. Hold the silence no matter what. Cael reached for her, but she vanished. The dream folded in on itself, leaving only the metronome, its tick burrowing into his skull. He woke drenched in sweat, the phantom rhythm echoing in his ears. By day the Alpha became restless. His council noted it. His scouts whispered about his distraction. Even his second-in-command, Leo, dared to ask what hunted him. Cael gave no answer. How could he? How could he explain that the woman he had once condemned, the one the pack believed lost, now lived in his dreams? Back in Greyfen, Nyla felt the bleed begin. At first it was faint, a flicker of something foreign brushing the edge of her mind. But soon it grew undeniable. When she lifted water from the well, she heard his voice inside her chest, steady and commanding. Hold the line. When she lit the stove, she saw his scarred hands striking flint in her memory, though he was miles away. It was Tether. The ward had kept him out for years, but now, somehow, his voice had broken through. She pressed her nails into her palm until they drew blood. The pain anchored her, reminded her of the cost of silence. She would not let him in. She could not. Nightfall came heavy. Nyla curled against the wall, exhaustion pulling her under. And there he was again, waiting. Cael stood inches from her, eyes storm-dark, searching. You are alive, he said in the dream, though his lips never moved. His voice cut straight into her head. Stay out, she thought fiercely, every syllable laced with command. This is not yours to claim. But his presence only pressed closer. His wolf half rippled beneath his skin, bleeding into the dream. His hand rose, clawed now, shadowed by instinct rather than choice. Nyla's breath caught. She forced herself to believe. It is only a dream. He cannot touch me here. And then the claws struck. She jolted awake with a gasp, clutching her arm. Pain burned hot across her skin. She tore back her sleeve and froze. 4 deep welts, fresh and raw, carved from shoulder to wrist. Blood welled at the edges, red against pale flesh. Her heart slammed. He had not touched her. He could not have touched her. Yet the mark was there. His claws, drawn not in the waking world but in the crossing bleed of dream into flesh. Nyla staggered back, staring at the wound, horror and fury twisting together. The tether was not just real. It was dangerous. If dreams could bleed into skin, silence would no longer protect her. The burns on Nyla's arm refused to fade. By morning they had darkened into ridges, raw and throbbing with a heat that pulsed in time with the metronome. She bound the wound tightly, but every beat of her pulse seemed to whisper the same truth. The Alpha had crossed the line. Not in flesh but in spirit. The tether was no longer a thread. It was a chain, and it was tightening. Her silence had always been her shield. Now it felt like a sentence. As she ground herbs into a poultice, her mind drifted to the night she disappeared. The night her life split in two. Flashback. 7 years earlier, the great hall of Blackridge was heavy with storm clouds that seemed to press down on the very stone. She had stood in the center, her throat bare beneath the hands of Priestess Mara, while the pack gathered in tense silence. At her side stood Cael Arden, young then, not yet scarred by battles but already alpha in every sense. His hand had been steady on the hilt of his blade, his jaw set with grim certainty. The prophecy had been read from a fragment of an ancient stone tablet, its words carried down for generations. The voice will crown or kill. The one who holds the name holds the fate of the Alpha's line. Every wolf in the hall had turned to her then. Nyla, daughter of a bloodline whispered about but never fully understood. The bloodline of the voice. She remembered the heat that had flooded her chest, the way words had surged up her throat, sharp and heavy like knives demanding release. The priestess had whispered in her ear, "Never say his name. If you do, you will decide his end." Cael's gaze had found hers, unflinching, but beneath the iron she saw it, fear. Not of her but of what she carried. That night, when the council demanded her binding chains of silence, a gagged mate bond she would never consent to, she ran. She fled into the Greyfen with nothing but her grandmother's metronome and the knowledge that silence was safer than love, safer than fate. Nyla snapped back from the memory, her chest heaving. She pressed her hand to her pendant, the obsidian stone caged in copper wire. Her grandmother had told her the truth before she died. Their family was cursed with the voice, a power no wolf should wield. If Nyla ever spoke the Alpha's true name aloud, she would seal his destiny, either raise him above all wolves or bring him to his grave. And now, after 7 years of silence, the tether had awakened. The Alpha had spoken her name first. The prophecy was moving again. Dusk fell like a blade. The forest grew too quiet, the usual chorus of night creatures absent. Nyla sat by the cold stove, forcing her breaths even. The bells above her door gave a tremor, not from word pressure this time but from movement. Someone, or something, was out there. She rose without a sound, hand closing around the jar of rowan dust. The door creaked. A shadow stretched long against the cracks. Then a hand appeared, not clawed, not wolf, but human, rough and scarred from years of labor. The hand dragged a blade across the wood, carving slow and deliberate strokes. Nyla froze as the letters took shape. She didn't dare move. Didn't dare breathe too loudly. When the hand withdrew, the words remained, cut deep into her door for her to see when dawn came. Break the silence. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. This was no wolf's doing. It was a hunter. A human. One who knew exactly what she was. Greyfen Forest was never meant to be crossed at night. Wolves whispered of it as cursed ground, thick with old magic. But Cael Arden was not a man to yield to superstition. His scouts had chased a figure across the border at dusk. A trespasser fast enough to leave trained trackers behind. Cael followed alone, his wolf half pushing him deeper into the shadows. The intruder's scent was sharp. Iron oil, human. A hunter. One bold enough to carve messages on warded doors. One reckless enough to slip into wolf territory with no fear of dying. Cael's eyes cut through the fog, following broken branches and the faint smear of boot prints. He expected to find blood, to find the hunter waiting with silver. What he found instead made his breath stop in his throat. Light. A faint glow of fire through the trees. A cabin. And her. Nyla Voss. She stood in the doorway, a figure carved by the years but still unmistakable. Her hair was longer now, bound in a rough braid. Her frame leaner, hardened by exile. Her face sharper, eyes darker. But it was her. The ghost. The woman he had buried in silence, the woman the pack believed gone. Cael froze. Rage tore through him first. Rage at the lie, the betrayal, the years of imagining her bones buried in some unmarked grave while she had hidden here. But beneath the rage came something heavier, quieter, a pull that no time could erase. The bond. Nyla felt it too. She did not move. Did not breathe too loud. For 7 years she had prepared for this moment, told herself if he ever came she would not falter. And yet now, standing under his gaze, her silence felt like a thread stretched to breaking. Cael advanced, steps slow but lethal. His wolf eyes glinted silver in the dark. 7 years, he said, voice like a blade dragged over stone. 7 years you let us believe you were dead. Nyla's hands curled into fists at her sides. She wanted to sign words, to write them on the air, to explain, but explanation was noise. Noise broke rules. She kept her mouth shut. He circled her, gaze never leaving her face. You ran from me. From the pack. From what you are. His hand twitched, claws half bared, but still he did not strike. Something restrained him, something more dangerous than fury. Inside her chest, words clawed at her throat. She wanted to scream that she had saved him, saved them all by leaving. That silence was not betrayal, it was sacrifice. But even in the heat of confrontation she remembered the prophecy. To speak his true name aloud was to choose his fate. Cael stepped closer, close enough to feel her heat, close enough for her to smell rain and ash on his skin. Say something, he demanded. Anything. Prove you're not the ghost I see in my sleep. Nyla's lips parted. A breath escaped, shallow and trembling. But no words followed. She shook her head. And then the ground answered for her. A tremor rippled through the earth, splitting the soil at their feet. The cabin's beams groaned, the ward bells shrieked though no wind touched them. Cracks tore across the clearing, jagged lines glowing faintly with buried ash and copper. Nyla's mouth was still open. She had not spoken. Not a sound. Yet the power beneath her silence surged free, raw and dangerous. Cael staggered back, eyes wide. He had faced enemies, curses, even hunters with silver blades. But nothing like this. The earth itself was listening to her silence. And it was ready to break. The ground was still trembling when Cael grabbed Nyla's wrist to steady her. His grip was hot, too strong, and for a moment the tether between them hummed like a live wire. Nyla jerked away, clutching her wounded arm to her chest. The cracks in the earth glowed faintly, ash rising like smoke from their edges before sealing again. Neither spoke. Neither dared. The silence between them was more dangerous than any words could have been. Then the forest darkened. Not nightfall, something else. A shadow spread across the clearing, moving without wind, without sound. It swallowed the glow of the cracks, smothered the stars overhead, until only the cabin's faint ward light flickered against it. Cael stiffened. His claws extended, instinct pulling his wolf forward. He stepped in front of Nyla, though his rage was still raw enough to demand her blood. Whatever this was, it was not her doing. The shadow thickened, shaping into the outline of a man. Broad shoulders. The suggestion of a jaw. The glint of eyes, silver like Cael's but colder, crueler. When it spoke, the voice was Cael's and not Cael's. Familiar timbre twisted wrong, every word vibrating like a chord struck out of tune. She does not belong to you. Nyla's stomach turned. The shape stepped closer, and for the first time in 7 years, she felt fear claw under her silence. This was no wolf. This was no hunter. This was something older, darker. Cael growled low, a warning. Show yourself. The figure smiled without lips. I am already shown. You just refuse to see. The shadow peeled itself further into form, until Cael was staring at his own reflection. An identical body, identical face, identical eyes. But where Cael carried iron restraint, this twin radiated hunger, every movement coiled and feral. Nyla staggered back, her hand hitting the cabin door. Her pulse hammered so loud it threatened to spill into sound. The shadow tilted its head toward her, gaze softening in mockery. 7 years of silence, it said. 7 years of holding yourself apart, not for him, but for me. Cael's claws flexed. She is not yours. The shadow laughed, a low and cutting sound. I am your other half, Alpha. Your wolf, stripped of mercy. Your shadow. What is yours is mine. And she was promised to me the moment you turned away. Nyla's chest constricted. The prophecy. The words she had run from. The voice will crown or kill. The one who holds the name holds the fate of the Alpha's line. She had never considered that the Alpha's line was not blood but shadow. The twins stepped closer, each footfall sinking into the earth without weight. Cael swung, claws slicing through air, but the shadow slipped between the strike as if made of smoke. It circled, voice curling around them both. She belongs to me. Not to the Alpha of flesh. To the Alpha of shadow. Nyla pressed against the cabin door, nails biting into the wood. The air grew cold, thick with something like oil seeping into her lungs. She dared a glance at Cael and froze. His body stiffened, his storm-glass eyes flickered. For a heartbeat, the shadow's form rippled and then, seamlessly, it stepped inside him. Not beside. Not against. Cael's body lurched, his features hardening, his expression warping into something feral. His own shadow had moved into him, bone and breath twisting to claim the shell. Nyla had fought when Cael's shadow surged inside him, but it was not claws or teeth that subdued her. It was the bond itself. The tether dragged her under like a tide, her body seizing with every command the Alpha gave, even when his shadow's voice spoke through him. By the time the pack scouts found them, she was on her knees in the mud, wrists chained in silver, her silence burning her throat like fire. They carried her into Blackridge as if she were a criminal dragged from exile. Wolves lined the path, muttering, eyes wide with recognition they could not admit aloud. Some spat at her. Others crossed themselves with signs meant to ward off evil. Most only stared, torn between awe and fear. At the heart of the village, the circle waited. Every wolf in Blackridge stood in formation, lit by torches that cracked against the pre-dawn sky. The stone dais rose at the center where Cael, still shaken, still shadow-tainted, stood tall. His expression was iron, but his eyes betrayed him. They flickered like storm glass under firelight, as though two beings stared through the same face. Elder Mara leaned on her staff, her gaze heavy with warning. 7 years in silence, and she dares return now. Why? Nyla did not answer. She could not. Her tongue was stone in her mouth, her silence both shield and curse. She stared at the ground, the chains at her wrists gleaming in the torchlight. Cael's voice cut through the circle. You left us to believe you were dead. You left me to bury your name. And now, you walk back into my forest with the weight of prophecy clinging to you like a plague. Her head snapped up. She wanted to scream that she had not chosen to return, that the ward had been broken, that his shadow had dragged her back into this. But her silence held, searing her throat. The crowd growled. The pack pressed closer. Whispers of traitor and witch spread like sparks. Mara lifted her staff. The prophecy is clear. The voice will crown or kill. The alpha's fate lies in her throat. Her old eyes narrowed. If she is danger, end her now before she speaks. The wolves roared in agreement, claws scratching against stone. Nyla's breath quickened. Chains dug into her wrists. She could feel the bond pulling, the tether tightening, Cael's stormglass eyes locking onto hers. His lips curled, not in fury but in demand. Say it, he ordered. Say anything. Prove what you are. The words struck her chest like a hammer. The bond demanded obedience. Her silence cracked. Her lips parted. One word escaped. Just one. Stop. The sound wasn't loud. It wasn't shouted. It was barely more than breath. But the effect was instant. The torches guttered. The air split with an invisible scream. Every wolf in the circle dropped to their knees, claws scraping against stone, blood pouring from their ears. Their howls became choked, silenced by a force they couldn't fight. Even Cael staggered, his body shaking, his shadow writhing inside him like a chained beast. Nyla stood alone, the only figure upright in a circle of fallen wolves. Her chest heaved. Her throat ached with the taste of copper. She stared at the devastation her single word had unleashed. Slowly Cael lifted his head. Blood streaked down from his ears. His eyes, both his and the shadow's, locked onto hers, wide with a terror she had never seen in him before. His voice cracked the silence. What are you? The circle reeked of blood and fear. Wolves staggered on shaking limbs, wiping crimson from their ears, staring at Nyla with wide, hunted eyes. She stood in the center, chains broken, chest heaving from the weight of a single word. They had called her traitor, exile, but now in the silence after her voice cracked the air, there was no name for what she was. Elder Mara forced herself upright, leaning hard on her staff. Her voice trembled, but not from weakness, from awe. It is true, she rasped. The bloodline lives. The voice is hers. She pointed the staff toward Nyla. And the prophecy has only begun to breathe. The pack erupted in shouts. Some screamed for Nyla's death, demanding the alpha end her before she spoke again. Others cried out in reverence, seeing her not as a curse but as the weapon to secure their survival against hunters and rogue beasts. The circle fractured, lines drawn in the dirt by fear and hunger for power. Cael stood above it all on the dais, shoulders rigid, eyes locked on Nyla. Blood still trailed from his ears, but he did not falter. His voice cut through the chaos. Silence. The crowd froze. He descended from the dais, each step deliberate, until he stood before her. He was too close, his presence suffocating, his shadow half writhing just beneath his skin. The bond between them hummed like a blade vibrating against stone. You should not exist, he said, voice low, storm dark. And yet, without you I am nothing. Without you the prophecy cannot end. Nyla's throat burned. She wanted to deny him, to scream that she had survived 7 years without him, without anyone. But the memory of the ward cracking, the hunter's message carved into her door, the shadow's claim, all of it weighed heavy. The prophecy was no longer just words on stone. It was here. No. Mara raised her staff again. Hear it clearly. The prophecy is not as you have been told. The voice does not simply crown or kill. It chooses. The Alpha who binds to her will decide the fate of our kind. One path leads to unity. The other to extinction. The words crashed into the circle like thunder. Wolves shouted, some pledging loyalty to Cael, others calling for his removal, fearful of the shadow that tainted him. And through it all, Nyla stood in the center, every gaze on her, every breath waiting for her choice. Then from the edge of the crowd, a chill swept over the clearing. The Shadow Alpha stepped free again, not smoke this time but flesh. His form was solid, indistinguishable from Cael's save for the cruel hunger etched into his eyes. His voice carried like a blade drawn slow from its sheath. She is not yours, he said. She was never yours. She belongs to the Alpha of Shadow. With me she will end the curse. With me she will rule. Gasps rippled through the pack. Two Alphas, identical in face and form, standing side by side. One bound by flesh, one born of shadow. Both tethered to her. Nyla's breath caught. The prophecy twisted inside her mind. The Alpha who binds to her will either unite the wolves or trigger their extinction. Her stomach dropped. It had never said which Alpha. The circle of wolves was still roaring, half in loyalty, half in rebellion, when the first horn blast cut through the dawn. Not a wolf's call. Not a signal from within. This was deeper, older. A human war horn. Every head turned toward the ridge. Figures appeared against the rising light, moving in formation. Dozens of them, cloaked in leather reinforced with iron, their weapons glinting silver. Crossbows, curved blades, and brands carved with runes that burned faint red in the morning haze. Hunters. For centuries they had stalked the borders, killing wolves in the dark, burning villages, scattering packs. They had never dared breach Blackridge's heart. Till now. The circle shifted. Wolves snarled, hackles raised, but uncertainty kept them from charging. Too many. Too well armed. And at their front, a woman walked with calm authority. Her hair was braided with wolf fangs, her armor banded with iron. She carried no weapon in her hand, only a scroll bound in wax. The Alpha's guard stepped forward, but Cael lifted a hand, halting them. His storm-glass eyes narrowed. You walk into my circle uninvited. The woman smiled without warmth. We walk where prophecy leads us. The crowd murmured, shifting like waves. Nyla's pulse hammered. Hunters had whispered about the voice before, always in shadow, always in threat. Now here they stood, bold enough to face the Alpha himself. The woman unrolled the scroll. We know what she is. We know what you both are. The voice will crown or kill, and the Alpha who binds her will decide the fate of wolves. But we will not let wolves choose their own destruction. We demand her decision here and now. Cael's shadow twin grinned, circling closer to Nyla. They understand even if you do not. You cannot silence prophecy. The hunter leader's eyes fixed on Nyla. You have two choices. Remain silent and keep the curse locked. Or speak and end the Alpha line forever. The pack exploded in rage. Some lunged toward the hunters, others shouted for Nyla's death, and still others cried out to let her speak. The circle was no longer a circle. It was a battlefield waiting to ignite. Through it all, the hunters did not flinch. Their formation never wavered, weapons held but not drawn. They stood as if they already knew the outcome. Nyla's throat burned. Her silence felt heavier than ever, but she could not ignore the pull. For years she had believed silence was survival. But now both wolves and humans were demanding sound, demanding choice. The hunter leader stepped forward, closer than any wolf dared. She dropped to one knee, then another. And as her knees hit the stone, the entire line of hunters followed suit, bowing in unison. Their voices rose together, deep and certain. Hail, Queen of Silence. The pack recoiled in horror. Cael's face twisted in fury. His shadow half laughed with hungry delight. Cliffhanger. Nyla staggered back as humans bent to her, wolves snarled at her, and the prophecy tightened like a noose around her throat. She was no longer hidden, no longer forgotten. She was the fulcrum of a war neither side intended to lose. The hunters' voices still rang in the air, Queen of Silence, when the circle broke into chaos. Wolves snapped their jaws, some throwing themselves at the hunters, others falling back in fear, torn between killing and kneeling. Torches fell, sparks leapt, and the clearing churned with confusion. In the center of it, Nyla stood frozen. The chains that once bound her lay shattered at her feet, yet she had never felt more trapped. Wolves demanded her silence. Humans demanded her word. And both alphas, flesh and shadow, watched her like predators circling the same prey. Then the noise fell away. The shadow moved. He didn't leap, didn't strike. He shifted, sliding between bodies and flame until he stood directly before her. And suddenly the shouts of wolves and the clamor of hunters blurred into nothing. His voice was softer now, almost tender, but the hunger in his eyes never dimmed. They will tear you apart. Both sides. Flesh wolves fear you. Humans would worship you until they bleed you dry. But he lifted his hand, black veins coiling beneath his skin. I can end it. Nyla's breath hitched. End it how? The shadow smiled, Cael's smile twisted wrong. If you join me, the prophecy dies with us. No crown. No death. No alpha bound to your throat. You will never be their weapon again. I can erase the curse. The words slid into her like hooks. 7 years she had lived in exile, terrified of the day her voice would be unleashed. 7 years fearing she would kill or crown a man she once loved. To have that burden lifted, to be free, was a temptation she had never allowed herself to imagine. But freedom had a price. What would it cost? She whispered. The shadow leaned closer, his storm-glass eyes glimmering with black fire. Everything. You would no longer be theirs. No longer human. You would be mine. His hand hovered before her, waiting. Say yes and you walk into my darkness. Say yes and silence is yours forever. Her chest tightened. The bond thrummed between them, not warm like Cael's tether, but cold, suffocating, inevitable. And yet, it felt like release. Nyla lifted her hand before she realized she was moving. The world outside, the snarls, the clash of wolves and hunters, faded to nothing. Only the shadow remained, waiting for her touch. Her fingers brushed his palm. The air recoiled. The ground shuddered. The tether flared, alive and wrong, binding her to the thing that was not flesh, not alpha, but still him. And that was when Cael broke through. His voice thundered above the din. Nyla. She spun as the real alpha shoved through the circle, eyes blazing with fury and betrayal. His gaze dropped to her hand, still half-curled against the shadows. His storm-glass eyes darkened, not with fear this time, but with rage. The pack had not held a lunar ritual in 7 years, not since the night Nyla vanished. Now, under a swollen harvest moon, the wolves gathered on the stone plateau, their bodies forming a ring around the dais where fate waited to be decided. Torches blazed at the edges, their fire swallowed by the pale brilliance pouring from the moon overhead. The air vibrated with anticipation, the tension of 1,000 throats holding back a howl. At the center stood Nyla, wrists unchained, her hair loose down her back, the obsidian pendant burning cold against her chest. She felt every gaze on her, wolves ready to bow or strike, hunters crouched in the shadows beyond the ridge, waiting to see what she would unleash. And beside her, 2 alphas. Cael, alpha of flesh, stood like a storm contained in human form. His scars glinted in the firelight, his shoulders unyielding. He had sworn to claim her not out of desire but out of duty, to bind prophecy to his will before it tore the pack apart. And his shadow, the soul-bound twin that had stepped free of him, smiled with feral delight. His form was identical, but his aura darker, hungrier, his eyes pools of stormlight laced with ink. He wanted no duty, no pack, only her. The priestess Mara raised her staff. The moon bears witness. Tonight the voice will choose. One bond, one fate. Crown or kill. The pack howled as one, their voices shaking the stone. Cael stepped forward, hand outstretched. His voice thundered across the plateau. Nyla Voss, you are mine. By bond and by blood I claim you. The bond thrummed inside her, pulling her toward him, demanding obedience. Her throat ached with the urge to speak his true name, to end the prophecy with one word. But before she could answer, the shadow laughed. He raised his hand and the moonlight itself split. The silver glow fractured into 2 beams, one bathing Cael in light, the other wrapping the shadow in its cold embrace. The night trembled as if reality itself struggled to decide which alpha was true. The pack cried out, confusion and terror rippling through them. Wolves fell to their knees, blinded by the split light. Even the hunters beyond the ridge faltered, weapons trembling in their hands. The shadow's voice coiled around Nyla. Choose me and the chains break. No crown. No curse. Only freedom. His smile widened. You were never meant for flesh. You were meant for silence, and I am silence. Cael's growl rolled like thunder. Choose me and the pack lives. Choose him and you damn us all. His hand reached for her, trembling with rage and something deeper he could not name. Nyla's heart pounded. The light seared her skin, both beams pulling, demanding. Flesh and shadow. Life and death. Duty and freedom. Her silence cracked. She opened her mouth, the weight of her decision trembling on her tongue. And then she did the unthinkable. No. The word exploded like shrapnel. Both beams shattered, moonlight raining in broken shards. Wolves collapsed, howling in agony. The hunters screamed as their weapons burned in their hands. And above them, the harvest moon went black. The plateau drowned in darkness so complete it felt like the world itself had ended. The night after the moon went black was not night at all. It was chaos. Wolves lived by the moon. Its pull was their rhythm, its light their anchor, its cycle their law. Without it, there was nothing but hunger and frenzy. The moment the sky collapsed into shadow, the circle of Blackridge tore itself apart. Wolves fell screaming, eyes rolling white, bodies snapping between man and beast with no control. Some clawed their own skin bloody, others turned on each other with savage teeth. The hunters who had dared creep near the ritual plateau were the first to die, torn apart before they could even lift their weapons. The torches scattered, fire spreading into the brush, and the night howled with madness. Cael fought to keep command, his voice breaking against the roar of beasts who no longer recognized alpha from prey. His shadow twin laughed amid the slaughter, his joy a black flame feeding on the ruin. And in the center Nyla staggered. Her silence had always been her shield, but now silence meant death. She opened her mouth. Stop. The word ripped through the plateau like a blade of thunder. Wolves dropped mid-lunge, their bodies convulsing, ears bleeding. The madness stilled, but so did she. Her knees buckled, the strength rushing out of her like water from a broken jar. The tether between her and the pack thrummed, draining her with every heartbeat. She clutched her chest, gasping, but forced herself upright. Another wolf snapped at a hunter's throat. Nyla screamed again. Down. Every wolf in earshot collapsed to the earth, claws scrabbling against stone, throats whimpering as if crushed by invisible hands. But Nyla's vision blurred. Her skin turned cold, her pulse slowing. Each word dragged her closer to the brink, burning her life for their obedience. Cael forced his way to her side, fury and terror carved across his face. Stop, don't use it, he shouted, gripping her shoulders. But the bond sang through him too, vibrating with her power, reminding him that without her command his pack would tear itself to extinction. Her voice cracked. Her body shook. But she still raised her head, fire blazing in her eyes. Obey. The command was final, sharp enough to shatter bone. Wolves screamed, the sound twisting into silence as one by one, they collapsed into unconsciousness. The plateau went still. No growls. No howls. Only the faint crackle of fire in the brush. And Nyla. Her chest heaved. Blood trickled from her nose. Her legs gave out. She collapsed forward into Cael's arms. He caught her, panic surging in his veins. But the moment her body hit his chest, he felt it. Her pulse was gone. Her eyes rolled back, lips pale. The voice that had saved them had burned her alive from the inside out. The world had gone silent. Nyla's body lay still in Cael's arms, her chest unmoving, her heart refusing to beat. Around them, the pack sprawled unconscious, broken by the weight of her final command. The hunters were gone, torn apart or fled into the trees. The torches had burned out, leaving only the endless void of a moonless sky. But Nyla was not gone. Her spirit rose like smoke pulled from fire, luminous against the black. She stood between the two alphas, her form no longer bound by flesh, her silence broken, her voice thrumming in the air like the strings of a great unseen instrument. Cael stared, his jaw tight, his eyes wide with something he had never allowed himself to feel, fear and desperation. His shadow twin grinned, teeth bared, eyes alight with triumph. They both reached for her. You belong to me, the shadow said, his voice rich with hunger. In death as in life. No. Cael's voice thundered raw. She is mine. My mate. My pack. My fate. Nyla's spirit looked between them. The tether that bound her to each pulled in opposite directions, stretching her thin, threatening to tear her apart. The prophecies' words burned inside her skull. The alpha who binds to her will either unite the wolves or trigger their extinction. The truth was clear now. He had to choose. If she spoke Cael's name, his shadow would be erased and the wolves would unite, but at the risk of his mercy being too weak to withstand the world. If she spoke the shadow's name, Cael would die, and the pack would survive under darkness and fear. Both paths led to ruin. Her silence shook. Her lips parted. The air thickened, the pack's very souls hanging on the sound that was about to escape her. Cael's storm-glass eyes locked onto hers. Say it, he begged. Say my name. The shadow's voice coiled like smoke. Speak mine and you will never be chained again. The forest trembled. The ground cracked. The tether demanded an answer. Nyla drew breath. Her spirit's voice rang like thunder, tearing through the void. And it was not Cael's name. Not the shadow's. It was another. A third name, one no wolf, no hunter, no alpha had ever heard. A name older than their blood, older than the moon itself. The moment it left her lips, the air split. The earth screamed. The void answered. The pack stirred in their sleep, whimpering as if they felt the weight of an ancient being awaken. Cael staggered, clutching his chest. The shadow recoiled, his grin faltering for the first time. The voice had not crowned. The voice had not